Day 3 of our Colorado Trail journey begins with more dried food, packing up camp, packing up our bikes, and filtering water at the super dope waterfall that we ended up camping by. Here's a slow motion shot just so you can understand what we were dealing with. We had a big day ahead of us as we were a little bit behind schedule. There was about 37 miles we were planning to cover, and throughout the day there would be 3 distinct big climbs that we would do across segments 25, 26, and 27.
Luke, show us how to descend the rest of CT25.
Okay, here we go.
The end of CT25 ended up being somewhat lackluster. It seemed like it would be kind of cool, but ended up being more of a cow path that eventually led to some muddy single track and turned into double track before eventually meeting up with CT26. Even though we had just done about 65 miles over the last 2 days and over 11,000 feet of climbing on our bikes, we felt pretty good and we're enjoying the beginning of CT26. The first 6 or 7 miles of CT26 were very enjoyable, very bikeable, until we eventually got to the climb up to the top of Black Hawk Pass, which was the high point of the segment. We ran into another group of bikers at the top of the pass who were kind enough to take our picture, and then we began the awesome descent on the other side of the pass to ultimately conclude segment 26. The rest of CT26 was almost all downhill, but as we got to the end of the segment, we knew there was very limited water resources on CT27, so needed to take a break, fill up our water bottles, and prepare for another 20-ish miles of riding before we got to our campsite for the night. After filling our water bottles and water bladders, we were probably carrying an additional 5 pounds each of liquid on our back, and proceeded to go down the super flowy single track on the rest of CT26. At the start of segment 27, we intersected a dirt road where you could easily access the segment by car if you wanted to. We didn't pause for any breaks though, and began up CT27. The beginning of the segment was actually extremely easy, very pleasant, and very pretty. Overall smooth single track, probably a blue square or intermediate difficulty. As it was past noon, we watched various clouds roll in and out of CT27, which meant that we got a little bit of rain at various points in time. There was never any lightning or thunder, so nothing that really slowed us down, but made for some interesting traveling nonetheless. Despite the rain though, everything that we encountered was rideable up to this point. CT27 had been a pleasant surprise. We thought it was going to be much more difficult. Eventually though, as we approached the end of the trail, it did get more technical. We got above tree line, there was a lot more exposure, there was also a lot steeper sections, so the thin air combined with tougher terrain made it more difficult to pedal. As we got higher up though, the views got more spectacular and we rode along this awesome ridge line for the next few miles. The terrain got increasingly steep at points in time, and we knew at the end of the segment we were going to be greeted by some very technical hike-a-bike. Super cool fun. Whoa! Fell again. Even though we had been riding our bikes for several days now, fully loaded, I still was not that good at controlling these very heavy bikes around tight switchbacks. One thing we had gotten a lot better at, though, was hiking and pushing our bikes uphill. But the hiking was well worth it at this point. Approaching the golden hour of the day, we were at some of the prettiest parts of our journey so far. At about 11,800 feet, the single track got to be about as gnarly as it got for this part of the trail. Here we're going down a scree field that is on a very tight ridge, kind of sketchy, kind of loose, wide enough though that I wasn't too nervous about actually falling or anything like that, but just kind of chugged down this thing as slow as we could. What goes down must come up. This kept happening as we'd get to the top of the climb, think we were at the end of the segment, but then realistically we'd have a lot more hike-a-bike, the trail would get gnarlier or steeper, and more exposed as we got to the end of segment 27. It was extremely pretty this entire time, which made it gratifying, and we had also had our biggest day of the trip so far. At the end of this day, we'll have put in nearly 40 miles of biking and about 7,000 feet of climbing, all on single track. At this point, we were truly at the top of the climb for the rest of the day. However, the ride down, the descent, was actually extremely gnarly. We had to walk several parts of the final descent to Taylor Lake. Just a very steep, exposed ride in some spots, not very fun on the bikepacking rigs. But nonetheless, we did make it down there just fine, and eventually were able to set up one of the coolest campsites I've ever been at in my entire life. Well, we got our tent set up and everything organized or disorganized. We had an amazing view of the mountains and an amazing sunset. Even had some wildlife come by that we were able to enjoy and watch as the day wrapped up. But with that wraps up our third day of our bikepacking journey. We have one more day remaining as we drop down into Durango and ultimately conclude our trip.